So when you go back into that jury room, ask yourselves, what was the known risk? And I think I already alluded to this. The known risk is this. You enter someone's home, you as a perfect stranger, at 2 o'clock in the morning, with the intention of causing that person physical harm. You can certainly assume that the known risks are that you're creating a serious and highly dangerous situation. Especially when you know this is an older man and he's got guns. So we got to take him out early, we got to take him out fast, and we have to take him out hard. And it's highly likely someone's going to be, and you know what? Someone was seriously harmed. And that certainly was Richard Loudon. The last element of aggravated burglary is that you would inflict or attempt to inflict serious physical harm on Richard A. Loudon. Now you all know the nature of the injuries of Richard Loudon. You've heard it. You all know the result of that vicious and brutal attack on Richard Loudon. You know he got a dislocation fracture between C6 and C7 of his cervical vertebrae in his neck. And as a result of that, he had a spinal cord injury. The spinal cord begins to swell. And as it swells, it starts shutting down the functions in the rest of your body. And that's what happened to Richard. That, ladies and gentlemen, is a serious physical harm. The state has proven that beyond a reasonable doubt. Remember, these are the 4 musketeers. Doesn't matter who inflicted that physical harm on Richard Loudon. They're all responsible, and each of these defendants acts for the other in terms of the situations that they create once, as a group, they embark on a criminal enterprise. All can be charged as a principal or with complicity as an aider or an abettor. In this case, the state has charged Jonathan Dukes as a principal. Why? Because the state felt there was sufficient evidence here that would permit you to find, beyond a reasonable doubt, that it was Jonathan Dukes who caused this physical harm to Richard Loudon. It's unchallenged and uncontroverted that Jonathan went to Richard's house to rob him. You heard it from witnesses, you heard it from Jonathan himself. You know serious physical harm was inflicted on Richard. You heard that from Michael Lee, the EMT. You heard it from Nurse LaPrairie from Robinson Memorial. And you heard it from Richard Loudon himself as he told Dr. Goods what had happened to him. Richard was consistent when he talked to each of those people. He told you that there was one black male. After that little woman came in, Jody Fetty, there was one black male that assaulted him on that back porch. And that individual grabbed his mouth, twisted his head, threw him to the floor, sat on him, and then covered his mouth. Now, ladies and gentlemen, you know from the testimony of Jim Oakes that the individual that he saw on that porch was hovered over Richard Loudon. Now, when he came out the door, that individual ran through the house, exited out the other door, and Jim Oakes tried to take a swing at him with that dowel rod that you have here. We don't know if he hit him or not. We didn't know if he hit him or not. Who was that individual? You know from the statements that you heard from Jonathan Dukes, that was him standing over Richard Loudon. The only thing Jonathan Dukes here has to say is, I didn't touch him. It was the other guy. It was the other guy. There is, ladies and gentlemen, one other factor, and that is that Jonathan Dukes here is the only person, an individual, acting in this criminal offense that had blood on his hands. He's the only one that was. Bragged about it in the car. Look, look, I did good. Read his letter. Read his letter. It says Richard tried to bite him. He admits pushing Richard's head into the floor. Wasn't enough. He just broke his neck. Ask yourself, if it's Cortez Oliver, how does he do all those things and still have time to get into the house and grab the coins, ransack the place, and get out the door? Ask yourself that question. There's plenty of evidence here, both direct and circumstantial, ladies and gentlemen, that would allow you to infer and find that beyond a reasonable doubt, Jonathan Dukes did inflict that serious physical harm on Richard Loudon. And remember, the law treats direct evidence and circumstantial evidence the same. One is not inferior to the other. And you'll recall the judge's example of little Johnny in the kitchen. And Mom says, hey, don't touch that pie. And she leaves the kitchen. Comes back in, and there's Johnny with pie around his face, pie on his hands. What can you infer, ladies and gentlemen? You can infer Johnny ate the pie. That's what you can infer. And here, you can infer that Jonathan Dukes assaulted Richard Loudon. You, as jurors, get to decide how important it is that Jonathan Dukes was the only black male crouching over Richard Loudon. He was the only one sitting on him, was the only one that covered his mouth, and the only one with blood on his hands. This was the man that Richard told you. And you can listen to that tape again. I'm sorry, CD. You can listen to that CD again, ladies and gentlemen. All you have to do is ask. Becky will set up the recorder and you can hear it again if you need to. But Richard told you that that was the man that twisted his neck and threw him to the ground. Let's assume for a minute, though, that you as jurors decide that it was someone else who assaulted Richard Loudon in that house. Let's decide that you folks believe it was Cortez Oliver that actually assaulted him. You know what, ladies and gentlemen? It doesn't matter. Under that felony murder rule, it does not matter. It might make Jonathan Dukes feel better if he tells you he didn't assault him, but in the eyes of the law, it makes no difference. It makes no difference. Because whatever anyone did in that house, all the other ones aided and abetted in that act. And Jonathan Dukes here was complicit in each and every act that occurred in that house. And as such, he's just as guilty as the principal actor. Count two, I'm going to make some of the same arguments with regard to aggravated burglary. But aggravated burglary is different. It requires different elements. So let's start at the beginning again. The state has to show that Jonathan H. Dukes here, on July 2nd of 2009, we already talked plenty of evidence of that, did by force, stealth, or deception. Okay, those are elements. Force, stealth, deception. What are we talking about? Well, stealth. They waited until dark, wore black, sneaked up to the back of the house. That's your stealth. Force. They knocked on that door. Knocked Richard down, broke his neck. Deception. You know what that is. Jody Fetty. Jody Fetty is our deceptor. She goes up to that house. She goes up to that door. She knocks on it. She tells this gentleman, who never saw her before in his life, my car broke down. Can I use your phone? Sure. Come on in. It's 2 o'clock in the morning. Come on in. He just wants to help out a little woman who's got car trouble. Next element is that they trespassed to 2950.